We want to share this recording, and we will be sharing the PowerPoint with you all at the end of the webinar. So thank you all for being on the line. Let's get started. So today we're going to be talking about the year 2 reporting and invoicing requirements, how to submit these requirements, how to submit the forms that you'll need to submit. We'll do an overview of the grant cycle, and we will discuss some of the new changes that you're going to see in the report this year. There are some big ones. We'll take questions at the end, but as I was saying earlier, you can also chat those questions as we're talking, and you will get a response from Laura. And if there's anything that Laura would like me to verbally respond to, she will nudge me so that I can take a minute to do that. And I'll take a couple of breaks to allow time for that. So let's get started. So before we begin, if you haven't already done so, there is a web page that is hosted on our website where you can see all of the reporting requirements. So all of these reporting requirements are in Exhibit B. So you can see all of that in one document. So if you haven't done that, download that document, Exhibit B. On that same web page, you'll also have the ability to download the sample of the report form. So basically, you can see the questions that are going to be asked on the reports prior to going into the fluid review system to submit your report. So basically, that PDF of the report questions is just for reference. So definitely use that if you'd like to get a preview of what we're going to ask. Let's take a quick minute to just discuss this timeline. So the Organizational Grant Program, it's a 2-year grant, as you're probably already aware. We do request that every year of the grant, you provide a report. So for the first year of the report, it's really just a check-in. It's a touching base of where you're at. For year 2, it's actually like a reflection. We ask that you provide kind of a summary of what's happened these last 2 years. These grants are meant to support both ongoing projects, programs, and general operating support. So the scope of these projects will have a wide range, and we know that. We hope that by now you're familiar with the fact that this funding is really meant to help you sustain your programming. And so we're going to be as flexible as possible, especially right now. We're definitely taking into consideration the big challenges that everyone is facing with the pandemic and the possible economic obstacles that you may be facing in the near future. So we are definitely looking at everything, reassessing how we're doing everything, reassessing how we're asking questions. So for this second year, really it's just, what have you completed thus far? And we know that maybe this last part of your second year, you may have had to make some big shifts. So we are aware of that and are definitely going to be flexible about the way that we are supporting you and the way that we are asking for information. So let's take a look at, before I move on, so these reports are going to be for activities that happen between July 1st, 2018 and June 30, 2020, the end of the second year of the grant funding. The changes that you're going to see in these reporting forms mostly revolve around cultural equity and inclusion. We also did reduce some of the questions down, specifically in the narrative section, to make this report easier and quicker to fill out. So, so these are the 4 pieces of the report: the report narrative, the supplemental materials, the expense budget, and the invoice. Under the report narrative, you will see there's only 10 questions now. We did modify the project challenges section so that you can provide an update on where you're at right now, what you've had to kind of deal with, and what you've kind of modified. Maybe you've had to stop some programming or take it onto a digital platform, or maybe you've just paused what you're doing and are still kind of in the waiting room trying to figure out what's going to happen next. And so that project challenges section is the place where you're going to just give us an update on that. So take that into account as you're submitting this information. We did add on a new question regarding cultural equity and inclusion. So you're going to see that new question, and I'll show it to you in a second, but we will ask a question about that. You are the first cohort of grantees who submitted a cultural equity and inclusion statement. So we are kind of touching base with you about what's happened thus far. Under supplemental materials, there is one additional attachment. It's a zip code list of all programming locations, and I'll show you what that question looks like. For the expense budget, there's no changes. We did provide just a little blurb so that you know that if there has been changes to the way that you've spent out the funds, that's totally fine, and you can just explain that in the expense budget explanations or just in the narrative. The invoice has not changed. It remains the same. So let's take a closer look at all of these forms. And before we do that, what might be helpful before you even go into the fluid review system is to have a couple of documents on hand that you're going to need to refer back to as you're answering these questions. So number one, a copy of your OGP contract and adjusted grant budget. This is basically the agreement that you signed back in fall of 2018. With that agreement, you were asked to submit a budget form. That budget is basically a projection out of how you were going to be spending that funding. We know that your actual expenses probably will not look like that. But we do want to make sure that you've got that adjusted grant budget to refer back to in case you need to kind of jog your memory on what you originally discussed with us about how you were spending the funding. You're also going to want to make sure you have a copy of the letter of impact to your board supervisor. Each year you are required, as a grantee, you're required to submit a letter to board of supervisors. The first year you submit a thank you letter, and the second year it's a letter of impact. This is definitely one year where you're going to want to check in with your board of supervisors. If you haven't done that yet, make your presence known, make it known that you are out here in the community, you're supporting arts and culture throughout the county. The Board of Supervisors definitely wants to see the impact of that funding. So if you haven't done that, if you haven't created that letter, take a minute to do that. Instructions for that is in Exhibit B. And you'll see the addresses in that document. So you will need to submit a copy of that letter. So make sure you've got that on hand. Proof of recognition. So maybe for this year, you may not have proof of recognition, especially if you didn't, if you had a canceled programming. And if that's the case, that's okay. You can submit proof of recognition from last year or any other prior year where you, part of the grant cycle where you did have the ability to do that. So submit proof of recognition, basically copy of a brochure, or a copy of, a screenshot from your website where you show that you are recognizing the Department of Arts and Culture as a supporter. Okay. And then in addition to that, 1 to 2 images, high quality images of programming that happened. Again, same idea here. If you weren't able to do everything you were hoping to do this last part of the grant award cycle, that's okay. Submit something from last year. So you may not have anything from this year. Like I said, that's fine. Submit something from the last time that you had programming happening. And then this is the new required attachment. Grantees are now required to submit a list of zip codes from locations of programming. So where have you done put on shows? Where have you done workshops? Where have you put on maybe outreach programming for the last 2 years? Submit those zip codes. Very important for us. We are now kind of collecting this information. We didn't used to do this in the past, but now it's become very helpful data for us as a department to be able to kind of see on a map where programming is happening. So we have added that question onto our application, into our report form, and so you will see that added on as a new requirement. So in terms of reports, year 2 reports really focus on the overall outcome, whereas the year 1 report is like a process where you're adding your process. So year 2, it's what are the outcomes that you're seeing from your 2 years of funding. So you're going to report out on those outcomes, the impact of the project on your organization, and any challenges you may have encountered. We know that you have encountered probably some big challenges these last couple of weeks. So communicate your overall reflections about the OGP project in general, and then address any significant lessons learned for the future, any responses in terms of how you're dealing with the current situation in terms of the public health crisis. We do use this information as a way to understand what's going on in the field. So we do look at these responses, especially the year 2 final reports. The grants and professional development team conducts an analysis each year of what we're seeing in those reports. Definitely this year is going to be is not going to be different. We are hoping to kind of create an analysis and use this information to be responsive and be a good supporter of your programming. So we want to make sure that we are understanding what's going on out there, how folks are dealing with this. So anything that you can provide in your report is very helpful. In terms of the deadline, we do request that you submit all of this information by May 15th, 2020. If you can do it earlier, it's highly encouraged to do it earlier. We do suspect that there might be some delays in processing of payments. So the earlier, the better. If you can get it in before that deadline, please try to do that. Invoices are for normally they are for reimbursement. However, in the invoice, when you submit that, you are submitting an invoice. You may be submitting invoices for funds that have not been spent, and we are aware of that. So if you've incurred expenses up to June 30th, 2020, submit all of that. We understand that you may have incurred expenses for a project that was not completed. You may have had to cancel some shows or some workshops or other services. And if that's happened, that's okay. We will still pay you out. We just want to make sure that we can see a little bit of information about how you're going about responding to those challenges. So all of this information is under terms and instructions in Exhibit B. And like I said, Exhibit B is on our website. If you need a link to that, we can send it to you. It's also, the link is here on this PowerPoint, and we will share this PowerPoint out. So let's start with the contract. The contract is very helpful because you will see here some of the information that you're going to need to put into the report. So you're going to see at the very top of the contract, your legal name, DUNS, and vendor ID number. The vendor ID number is extremely important. The vendor ID is what LA County Vendor Services uses to send out your payment. So if they have information registered for your vendor ID that is not correct, like let's say there's been an updated contact, there's been an updated address, or an updated FEIN, something that's registered with your vendor ID that's changed, you will want to make sure that before you even submit the report that you've updated LA County Vendor Services about all of this information, and that what they've got in their records matches what we've got in our records. The Department of Arts and Culture does not share a database with LA County Vendor Services, so they're going by what they've got in their system, and if it doesn't match, there will be a discrepancy, and it'll cause a significant delay in the payment. So take a first step, make sure that all of your information registered with them is matching with what we've got. If you need help, like you're not sure how to update the system that they've got, you can definitely email us at grants@arts.lacounty.gov, and we can send you the phone number to contact LA County Vendor Services. And all of that information is also in Exhibit B. Okay, so on the contract, in addition to that general information, you're going to see under Section 2 the purpose and scope of the grant. So what was this grant funding supposed to be used for? In general, these funds are for it's unrestricted revenue, so there's going to be a wide array of ways that folks will be using this funding, and so we're hoping that that the scope that you've been able to support what you thought you were going to be able to support, especially right now that it's year 2. You probably have completed a large portion of the project, but that being said, we know that there will have been modifications. So this is basically, the contract is to refer back to what you originally were projecting. This also has the maximum grant amount. So the maximum grant amount is for 2 years. So you're splitting that in half. And in this invoice for this year, you're requesting the second half and whatever remains. So you may have submitted a partial invoice. Make sure that you subtract that from the full second year award, and then you're just submitting for the final balance. If you haven't done any invoicing for this second year, then you're submitting for the full last part of the grant, the second year of funding, so half of the award. So just a reminder that all of the information that you're going to submit is going to be on Fluid Review, the grant management system. And so when I refer to the adjusted grant budget, it would be a form that you filled out in the Fluid Review system, and it lives in that system. So if you need to download that document, you can either email us if you're having trouble. Otherwise, what you would do is go into the Fluid Review system, log into the award for which you need to submit a report. On the upper right hand side of the screen, where the logo is, where your logo lives, under that there's a button that says download application. When you click download application, it's going to give you a zip folder of every form you've ever filled out with us and any attachments that you've sent us. So you'll see adjusted grant budget will be one of the forms when you click download application, and you'll be able to look back at that form by doing that. Okay, so the adjusted grant budget, this is what it looks like. This is what you filled out back then when you submitted this budget back in 2018. You submitted basically a snapshot of what line items you would be, basically what you would be spending out by line item from the grant money and from the matching expenses. Every dollar of the OGP award does need to be matched with at least $1 or more. So you're going to refer back to this adjusted budget to see how you originally were thinking about the way you were going to do that. So this is just for reference. It's not something you're filling out. In terms of the cash match, the reason that we ask you to submit that budget is because we, as the county, want to make sure that we are not providing more than 50% of the cost of the project for each fiscal year. So that's why we ask for a dollar for dollar match, and we know that you may be showing a lot more than a dollar matching. Maybe your final costs are a lot more than what the award was, and that's fine as long as it's not less than what the award supported, or less than the award amount for each year. So when you go into the system, couple of reminders, you want to make sure you're using the account information that you used when you submitted the application. If you don't have that information or you want to update that account information, maybe you've created a new account and you've submitted a new application using a newer account, then you would get in contact with us so that we can move all of your account forms and tasks into the new account. We do have the ability to do that. So get in touch with us if that's the case. But if you know what your credentials are and you have that information, then you're just signing in. If you've forgotten your password, then you just click "Forgot your password." The blue sentence "Forgot your password" under the sign in button, and that will prompt a link to be sent to your email to update your password. Make sure that you're starting from a Word document and that you are able to submit this information at the least 5 days prior to the deadline. We're hoping that you can avoid some last minute stress. The fluid review system, we've noticed, does get a little glitchy close to deadline time. So we don't want you to go through more stress than you need to. So make sure that you're submitting as early as 5, if you can do it now, do it now. But at least 5 days prior to the deadline, so you're not dealing with any unnecessary stress. And so once you've logged in, what you're going to see is the list of all the grant applications you've filled out. So that's here under your grants. And you're going to find the OGP grant for which you need to submit your final report. So you're going to see the one that says awarded manager grant round 2 invoicing and reporting. Click on the name of your organization to begin the report. Or you can click edit, either one. Okay, so once you click that edit or on your name, you're going to see all the forms that are available for you to fill out to manage your grant. The top 3 are optional, so don't fill those out if you don't need to fill those out. So if you don't have a change of contact, don't worry about that first form. If you don't need to submit a partial, we are actually encouraging folks to just submit a final invoice. Do not submit a year 2 partial invoice. And I think we've actually turned off that form, so you won't see it. We're not allowing folks to submit partial invoices anymore. It's just the final invoice. And then the project amendment request will only be if you are required to basically change the whole scope of the project. Modifications are fine. Adjustments to the way you use the funding is fine. If you need to completely change the way you use the funds, like maybe you were originally going to support a series of events and now you're going to use that funding to support someone's salary, that would be cause for an amendment. So if you have questions about that, you can make an appointment to talk to us. Otherwise, focus on the last 4 forms on this list, which are the final report narrative question, the final report matching expenses, supplemental materials, and then final report invoice. And you're going to need to complete all 4 of those in their entirety before you click on the submit final report green button on the dashboard. So you can start really anywhere. You can start with the invoice, you can start with the narrative, pick one and open it up. So here on this example, we've started with the budget. So the budget seems a lot more complicated than it actually is. Hopefully, once you get in here, it won't be too confusing. But basically, what this budget table is showing is the way that you've used the funding, both in terms of the award, like what specifically did you use the award funding for, and what specifically did you use the matching funds for. It might be the same thing, it might not. So that's what this budget is helping us to understand, is where, how you spent out that funding and the match. There are validation rules on this budget to ensure that when you submit this, that the tables have the correct figures so that you can't submit a budget table that shows that OGP funds were more than the matching funds. So those totals, you'll see they're being validated. And if you get a false on your meet or exceeds expectations box, that means that the funds, that the figures are not correct, and you'll need to revisit your budget table to make sure that it switches to true. So once you've got it correct, once you've got it the right way, it'll show true on both the second column and the third column. I'll take a minute in case there's any questions.
Hey, Ross. So we have a question about where should venue rental fees be placed, in programming or operations, specifically if it's for a performance?
I would say operations.
And we don't have any other questions in the chat box at this time.
Okay, great. All right, everyone. So that's the budget. So we'll move on to the narrative questions. This is probably where you'll spend most of your time. And hopefully you're starting with a Word document and just cutting and pasting these responses into the Fluid Review system so that you don't encounter any challenges with character counts, because note there are some strict character counts here. Number one is auto-filled for you. Briefly describe your OGP funded project. That will auto-fill for you, so you don't actually have to type anything into that. You're going to start with number two. So this is where you're going to provide some information on the goals of the project. 750 characters is what the space that you've got here to do that. So do your best to kind of explain what your goals were, what progress you made towards those goals. If you can demonstrate using any qualitative and or quantitative information, you can provide that. And what you deem as the greatest success in the last 2 years on this project in terms of impacting your organization and or your community in general. Give us some insight on that. Through this information, we're hoping to gain a deeper understanding of the project scope, the implementation and progress. And then we also want to know kind of how you've had to make modifications. So that's where you would submit that information to project challenges. This is where you're going to update us on what you've had to do to adjust to the current events, to what's going on now. So we will expect that a lot of folks will have some information here, possibly about canceling of programming, rescheduling of programming. Maybe you've completely updated the structure of the organization. Provide any details like that here. If you've had to take out loans, or if you've had to kind of deal with any large scale challenges, provide any of that here. And then you're going to see number 6 is actually has to do with your cultural equity and inclusion statement. So this is where you would provide an update on the impact of that statement, policy, or plan on your organization's work. This is a brand new question. It's kind of a way for us to check in with you now that it's been almost 2 years since you've submitted those documents. Where you're at now, how your organization is thinking about this. So provide any information about programs, activities, staffing, planning, or any other internal processes or changes that have been made as a result. If you can provide a specific example, that's great. If you don't have one, that's totally fine. And then for budgets of over $1 million, in addition to answering that question, you would also want to make sure you're speaking specifically to the plan that was submitted. If you didn't submit a plan, then skip this question. You may not have done that. And if you didn't, then skip through this one. You won't have to answer that question. And what do we do with these responses? The way that we use this information is we do analyze it, and we do create kind of a summary of data and trends that we're seeing in the field. The research and evaluation team helps us to kind of take a closer look to understand general shifts in the nonprofit art sector. And we're hoping that through doing this, we can be as responsive as we can. So this year, definitely, we're going to be taking a really close look at all of the responses that we're seeing. And so, be as transparent as you can, as forthcoming as you can. We know that there will be big challenges this year, and we just want to see, kind of how you're thinking about it and how what you've had to do to kind of respond. In addition to those two CEI questions, you will see there are some questions about attendance. So for the last 2 years, in terms of a year project, who has attended? How much of that was paid attendance? How much of it was free attendance? And I know that it can be confusing because some of these projects might be for salaries or general operating support. So in that case, then when you're talking about the project, you're really talking about overall programming for the last 2 years, everything that you've done. So collect those numbers, figure out, what that looks like. If you've got workshops that happened, provide information about what, were they paid or unpaid attendance, staff members that were involved, artist partners that were involved, musicians, designers, who was involved in these projects, and then any volunteers that you might have had supporting, including board members or artists, provide that information. And then we get more specific. So we do ask now some demographic questions. This might be the first time you're seeing this. I think we did implement these questions 2 years ago. So this might be the first time you may be seeing these questions. So we're asking now specific information about the communities you serve. So be as specific as possible. And these are not numbers. You're just checking basically who of these groups, who do you serve? You may not know exactly who that is, especially if you are not collecting data this way. So just do your best to kind of project what you think might be the case. If you're an arts education organization, you're very likely going to be supporting providing K through 12 audiences with programming, right? So figure out which ones of these apply to you, which ones of these apply to your audiences and your participants. Select those groups and be as specific as you can be. And this does help us in terms of when we do our analysis, in addition to seeing zip codes of where the programming is happening, it helps us to understand as an organization how you are connecting, how you're assessing the groups that you serve, and how you kind of come to an understanding of how your programming happens and how you try to focus on these groups as part of your community. So then we come to the supplemental materials task. Under this task, there are 4 required attachments. So number 1, the copy of the letter of impact to the Board of Supervisors. You're going to provide this copy here under supplemental materials. If you haven't done this yet, go ahead and do this now, or make sure you do it before the report is submitted so that you can send us a copy of it through this supplemental materials task. Provide the proof of recognition here, the artistic documentation. So at minimum 1, at the most, I would say 2 high quality images. And then the new programming zip code list. So this is where you're showing us for the last 2 years where this programming has happened, where you've done workshops, where you've done outreach concerts, where you've done services, where you've provided any kind of arts programming or services throughout the last 2 years. Collect those zip codes and put them here in this attachment. And then this last form is the money form. This is where you're showing us how much to pay you. So just a quick heads up that this form the general information here is all filled in, including your vendor ID number, is filled in from the user setup form. So if you've changed any of this information, you need to make sure that you go into your user setup form, which is one of the first forms you ever filled out when you started your account with Fluid Review. Find that user setup form, update that. That autofills this invoice form. And so that way, what you've got in our system is autofilling in all of your invoices. And so it's autofilling correctly. If you try to basically change it without changing the user setup, you're going to encounter a glitch. So definitely revisit your user setup form if you've got any changes here on your vendor ID number or on your legal name, your main address, state, zip code, anything like that. The invoice amount is basically the balance. So if you've never invoiced us, it's just the full second year of funding, half of the award. If you've already submitted a partial invoice, it's the balance remaining from that second year. And you would submit that here under the invoice amount. And then you are certifying that the funding was matched dollar for dollar. We're not going to ask you for proof of that. You just certify that you've done that. And then you save and exit, and make sure you're saving and exiting every form that you're filling out, because there is no auto save on the system. So once you've completed all of those pieces, it'll show complete here, green buttons on each of these tasks. Be careful, because if you even go into one of the questions and just type one letter into one of the questions, if everything else is incomplete, and you come back and save and exit and everything is not complete, but you did submit at least one symbol in one of the questions, this might say complete and it's actually not. So make sure you complete everything in its entirety. Check back if you're not sure, and then once everything is actually complete, click on the Submit Final Report button. Very important to click that button, because we will not know that you've completed this report unless you click that Submit Final Report button. It'll just live on the ether, and we will have no idea if you've completed it until you submit it. So make sure you submit it. And just a quick heads up that we do ask for folks to make sure that you don't have to submit proof of expenses, but that you're keeping those documents somewhere that's accessible. Every year, we are auditing 10% of our grantees. And this is basically a small portion, about 40 of our grantees, to just make sure that we are being responsible in the way we're stewarding our funding as a government agency. So we may come back to you and ask for financial statements. Most likely we won't, but in the case that we do, we want to make sure that you're ready for that, and that you've got any receipts, any QuickBooks reports, anything like that, where you can provide us with proof of expenses, that you're able to do that. And this wouldn't happen till June or July. But just, a heads up that might happen. And I want to make sure you all know, that being said, that there may be a case where you've had to suspend programming and everything in terms of your programming is on hold, and that's fine. And so we're hoping that by July you might have a little bit more information about what is going to happen with this year's programming. But just know that we are going to be as flexible as possible, and we're hoping to be as responsive as possible to your needs. Definitely feel free to send feedback to us. We are reassessing and reviewing every question that we're asking. We don't want to create more obstacles than we need to for you all. We know it's a tough time, so our ears are open and we're available to check in. If you have very specific questions to your organization situation that you would like to check in with me about, you can definitely do that. We'll send the PowerPoint and the webinar recording, as well as a link to an appointment website to submit a request for an appointment if you want to do a one-on-one check-in. So I have a couple minutes. If you have any more questions that we didn't discuss, I'll take a look at the group chat, and if Laura has anything, we can answer that now.
Hey, Roz, I do have a question. And this is regarding, I think you've already clarified this, but just in case, when counting and providing metrics for participation and reach, if the project was to support rental of a rehearsal space, should folks be counting audiences who eventually saw the productions being presented, actors, dancers, participants who participate in the production? Whom should be included?
Yes. So anybody, and this can be based on your, so let's say, for example, that you have an annual program that happens each year, and maybe that didn't happen this year. You can project out what your numbers, what you hoped to have seen in your numbers based on the prior years. But yes, all of those numbers that you're submitting for volunteers, for staff involved, for artists involved, all of that is based on the programming for these last 2 years, who was involved in the production execution of the project. And if that means the full run of every program for the last 2 years, then think about who those folks were.
Another question was, how should folks be changing their address in Fluid Review? How can they access that user setup page?
Yes, thank you so much for bringing that up. The user setup page, that form is going to be, I believe, under the tasks. So you have, when you log in to the Fluid Review system, you'll see the tasks, 2 tasks at the top, and then the grant forms that you filled out at the bottom. So the user setup should be at the very top under tasks. And if you have any issues with finding it, just definitely email us, but it should be under the tasks. You probably submitted a 501c3 verification. That's one of the tasks. And then the user setup form would have been the second task that you created to get into the Fluid Review system and have access to our applications. Also, I think I forgot to mention, definitely make sure that you don't just update our user setup form. If you've had big changes, vendor ID number related, call vendor services and update that record as well. Because like I said, these records are not the same. What we've got might not match what they've got. And if you submit an invoice that doesn't match what they've got, they will delay the payment. It will be a problem. So we don't want you to run into that. So make sure that you are updating both. I'm seeing on the chat, somebody is asking about having accidentally created a new account because they couldn't get into the old one. So if that's the case, if you want to use the old one, just click on new password, forgot password to get the old password updated. If you just want to transfer everything into the new account, then email us so that we can do that for you. Okay, and then one more question here. Oh, sorry, I don't think I fully answered. What is the vendor services website? It's a long URL. So that information is under Exhibit B. It's also on our grant. So if you see on the screen here, there is a web page. Go to this web page. You're going to see here Exhibit B, and you'll be able to find the information for contacting vendor services in Exhibit B.
I've also just added it to the chat box. So if folks, you can copy and paste the help page for vendor relations, and then I'll paste as well the search page so you can look up your vendor info.
Wonderful, thank you. And then one more question. Fluid Review allows you to input in several sessions as long as you save the work before exiting. Yes, you can save and continue later on. You don't have to submit everything all at once in Fluid Review. You can you have the ability to say save and continue, or save and exit, and basically nothing gets submitted until you actually click that green submit button. So you'll always be able to go back into those forms before you hit that submit button. After you hit the submit button, then you won't be able to see those forms anymore. And if there's a case where you need to correct something, then you would need to contact us so that we can allow you to see those forms again. And then just a reminder, after submitting, make sure you click download application to get everything, the whole record of everything you've ever submitted for the last 2 years, all in a zip file for you so that you have that as reference for future records. You can do that through the download application button. It's confusing because it says download application, but that doesn't just mean application, it means every form you've filled out. Okay. So I have a couple more minutes if there's anything else that anyone has that they want to ask here. And if not, we're done for the day. Thank you, everyone. Just a reminder also that there is a webinar after this one, starting at 5 p.m. We have a group called Art Converge that's hosting a webinar hosted by a banking professional, an executive who is going to support the field in terms of submitting an application for Paycheck Protection Program. So if you're interested in doing that, I think I submitted a link to you all through the chat box, and there's still tickets available for that if you would like to do that.
Just
thank you, everyone.
Once more, in case.
Oh, thank you. Yes, Laura just submitted that link again for you all. Thank you, everyone. We wish you the best. We're hoping that everyone is staying safe, adjusting well to this situation. We can't wait to, see you again. Thank you for everything that you do. And know that you can count on us for any questions, anything, just, feel free to check in with us. We are here to support you, and thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.